Week 14 is nearly upon us. Injuries galore. You need some help. We've got answers. So we are going to get into your week 14 waiver wires. Number one, Tyler Huntley from the Baltimore Ravens. Lamar's knee injury is days to weeks. So there's some potential here where this running quarterback can help you. Rick, how do you feel about him with this playoff schedule coming up?
Yeah, this is kind of precautionary until we get more information on Lamar Jackson because we don't know exactly how long, if he is going to miss games or how long he is going to miss games with this days to weeks thing that Harbaugh came out with after the game. So it is precautionary. Huntley didn't exactly light it up in his opportunities last year, but when we look at this playoff schedule, if he does have to start with his rushing upside, obviously 10 for 41 today and a touchdown, it's a pretty solid player if you're looking to stream with matchups against Cleveland, Atlanta, and Pittsburgh in the playoffs. None of them are juggernauts on defense. Obviously, Pittsburgh is better on defense with Watt on the field, so that's not the best matchup. But I don't fear Cleveland or Atlanta, and I thought we were gonna fear Cleveland, but that's just not how it's played out so far. So, yeah, it's precautionary. I do think there are some better options that I feel safer with because of volume. Obviously, he was efficient today with 27 for 32, but they don't have the wide receiver core. Their tight ends are the biggest part of their receiving game in Baltimore. So it's not like he's going to, even throwing 32 times, it's probably not likely that he's going to put up a 300-yard day. So that rushing really helps, but there's some other guys that I do like more. And plus, we don't know for sure how many starts Huntley will get if he gets any.
The rushing upside is what really is intriguing about him for sure. Because we saw that last year when he got some action. Is he's going to run the ball and he's got the ability to do so really well. Next up, Mike White from the Jets. Another performance where volume was king for him. Didn't quite squeak it out against the Vikings, but gave you plenty of fantasy production. How do you feel about this one? Because this is a really juicy playoff schedule. I mean, after obviously Buffalo in Week 14, it gets pretty solid throughout the playoffs for him.
Yeah, and Buffalo's defense hasn't been as good of late as we expected, right? They've had some injuries on the defensive side and they are good, but when we look at Detroit and Jacksonville and Seattle, these are teams where the Jets could shoot out with them. And Mike White getting 57 attempts, if even if it's 40 or 35, if he gets some more efficiency in there, which like he had against a bad defense last week against the Bears, then this guy turns into a guy that could win you some fantasy matchups, and that's what we're looking for right now. And we know Zach Wilson's not getting the job back right now. I think these players really like playing with Mike White, and we're seeing Garrett Wilson go nuts. So I think that this is the guy that's going to start the rest of the season, and then they'll reevaluate what they're going to do going in the next year. But I think you do get a starter for the playoffs out of Mike White.
100%. All right, another guy, Jared Goff, the Detroit Lions. They over the last 5 weeks, they've been very strong, and he's had some pretty solid weeks throughout the season. This matchup, come playoff time, is pretty juicy as well, and the ownership's still low enough where you should be able to get him. Obviously, not going to get you any rushing upside, but we know that offense is pretty high powered. How do you feel about him going into playoffs?
Yeah, this would be my number one streaming quarterback for the playoffs. Looking at, obviously the Jets aren't they're not a team that you're just going to, walk all over typically. Minnesota's got a really good passing game and really good offensive weapons. Not that Detroit doesn't, because they do, but I do think that it's a little bit different there. Um, but when you look at week 16 and week 17, if your
All day.
team makes it there, if you have a bye in week 15, then Jared Goff is set up nicely. The Bears defense in the championship week, we're gonna be telling you to start a lot of Lions that week because the Bears are just horrific on defense right now. And that's what we're really looking at with Jared Goff, right? Get past week 15 and you can fire him up week 16 and week 17 and feel pretty good about it and feel great about it if he's your QB2 in a super flex league.
Absolutely. All right, tight end Juwan Johnson. Now, obviously, his game hasn't gone. It'll go Monday night against was he got Tampa Bay this week, but then bye week next week. And then for your playoffs, he gets Atlanta, he gets Cleveland. Those are two solid matchups. Philadelphia is not a great matchup for him, obviously, but this is a tight end that's still got low ownership, but is getting involved. I know last week was a bit of a dud for the Saints, but everyone that faces San Francisco has trouble. How do you feel about Juwan Johnson, at least in the early part, first couple weeks of the playoffs?
Yeah, I still feel fine with him even against Philadelphia because while Juwan Johnson was getting some more volume up until that 49ers game, the touchdown upside with him is what has really propelled him this season, right? He's getting some touchdowns, and that's what you can get against Atlanta and Cleveland, even Philly. He could only have 4 targets, but end up with 2 touchdowns because that's the type of red zone threat that he is. But yeah, definitely not necessarily somebody you have to get this week, right? Because your league mates may look over him going into week 14, so you may be able to wait. But if you really want to shore up somebody that you can play for 15 and 16 for sure, then you want to go get him this week and make sure nobody else picks him up. But you may be able to wait depending on your league, if you want, or if you have somebody else that you need to play because of bye, and then you want to drop them for him. After that, we'll probably have him on this video next week as well.
Next up, Greg Dulcich. He had himself a week this week. 8 targets, 6 catches, 85 yards. Looked really good for a really bad Denver Broncos team. But when you look at the playoff push, you need a tight end. This is a very good matchup for him. How do you feel about Dulcich in this playoff push?
Yeah, when you look at weeks 14, 15, and 17, you expect those teams, Kansas City and Arizona, to put up points. So you expect Denver to have to throw in those games. Obviously, the Rams are having their own struggles on offense right now with Stafford and the contusion to his spine. Who knows if he'll play again this year? I would probably just shut him down if I was the Rams, right? And hope he gets healthy for next year. So that's the only week that I'm worried about here because I feel like they have to throw, and I want a tight end and an offense that's going to have to throw. And obviously, he's becoming one of the favorite targets of Russell Wilson, even though Russell Wilson has not been very good this year.
All right, Evan Engram. He, as well as a guy that we've been telling you about all season, that volume is here for him. He can get you production weekly because it's getting targeted. This week, a touchdown really saved it. Obviously, 5 for 30 is not great unless you're getting full PPR for a tight end. But when you look at this guy, he's another one that's got a pretty solid matchup throughout the playoffs with low ownership. You should be able to get him and play him if you need tight end help. Where are you at with him, Rick?
Yeah, this is volume, and we know Jacksonville, especially if ETN's foot, struggles to heal for the rest of the season, that Evan Engram is going to get targets. They're going to throw the ball a lot. I know we had some injury concerns with Trevor Lawrence during this game, so who knows where that goes. But yeah, the schedule week 17, obviously another juicy matchup. But when we look at the tight ends this year, I mean, Travis Kelce only had eight PPR points this week. George Kittle only had like 4 PPR points this week. This is, people are going to look at the bad Engram weeks and talk about those, but every tight end's having them. Obviously, Kelce doesn't have very many. But outside of him and, maybe Mark Andrews, probably the 2 most consistent tight ends on the season, everybody else is so close. So if you need tight end help, I do like the way this shapes up. Tennessee in week 14 can't cover anybody. They are not good in the passing game. They have a decent run defense, but it opens up for them and could be a good stretch for Evan Engram to close out the season.
And look at all the injuries this week. It's hurt some of those tight ends. I mean, Lamar Jackson loves his tight ends. Well, now he's out. Brock Purdy is in for San Francisco. Do we know what he wants to do? I mean, obviously looked pretty solid this week, but I mean, there's some concerns with some of those. So if you need a tight end, I mean, this is certainly somebody that's still low ownership that his quarterback's at least on the field. I mean, he may be hurt, but we know what we're getting out of him potentially. All right, next up, Zonovan Knight. This is a guy we mentioned last week and had himself again another day. Looked good, got targeted in the passing game, has a solid fantasy matchup throughout the playoffs. Detroit, Jacksonville, and Seattle are all teams that he will score on if he continues to lead the backfield. And there's no reason he won't. Michael Carter was out this week, and we're not entirely sure what that looks like going into next week, but that injury could linger, and he's the top guy. How do you feel about Knight going forward?
Yeah, I think at this point, last week when we mentioned him, we had the caveat that the Chicago Bears defense is horrendous and he looked really good against them. He did it again in his second start against the Minnesota Vikings, who aren't a vaunted defense either, but neither are Detroit, Jacksonville, and Seattle in the playoffs. Now, Michael Carter could hurt his usage, but Knight has done everything that you would want him to do, and there's no reason why Ty Johnson couldn't be the one that gets pushed out when Michael Carter gets back and Zonovan Knight still have a heavy workload in this offense with both of them, right? And we're looking at 8 targets in 2 weeks, 8 catches on those 8 targets, and gives you a little bit of PPR upside and rushing upside. So right now I'm liking what I've seen from Zonovan Knight so far in his two games of action.
Absolutely. All right, next up, James Cook. Obviously, early on in the season, it was kind of up and down, but we've seen significant improvement and the significant usage increase, and he's gotten very involved and looks solid. He has some pretty good matchups going into the playoffs. How do you feel about him in your running back position?
Yeah, I mean, if he's going to get these 5, 6 receptions, then that already makes him interesting in a Buffalo Bills offense, right? So you tack in him getting 12 to 15 rushing attempts and being efficient with them, then he is very interesting. And I thought when they traded for Naeem Hines, that was the death of James Cook for 2022, not long term, but for 2022. And it's weird because they go out and get like the same type of person that you would expect as James Cook, and it's turned into James Cook getting more work. Like it worked out backwards is how I thought it was going to happen when that trade happened. So um yeah, when you look at these defenses, obviously as a running back, the matchups matter less when you can catch the ball out of the backfield because sometimes that can be more valuable when you play a good defense because that's how you kind of keep them on their heels, right? You get some dump offs, some screens, and kind of help out against that pass rush. Well, he gets he gets Chicago in week 16. We'll talk about that every time. You want to start people against Chicago. Um, and none of these other defenses are like so strong that you're worried to start him against running or in the pass game. So I think that he could be big if he's going to get this usage. It's only been 1 week. So we are kind of chasing here, but you don't want to be too late. And he's only 26, 23, and 31% owned on the different platforms. So I want to get him now. And if it doesn't work out, it is what it is. But if it does, it could be a huge get because every fantasy analyst, every fantasy player has been saying for the last couple of years, if the Bills get a running back that they use heavily, they're going to be very, very valuable. They don't even have to be the most talented. They just need that work in that offense. And if he's going to get 20 touches in the Bills offense,
Huge.
huge.
All right. Speaking of huge, Cam Akers had himself a date finally. I mean, this is what we expected last year for the injury, this year after the injury. Finally had it today. So with the playoff matchups that he has, this could be a really nice time to scoop him up. I mean, he's still, as you can tell here, 55% ownership is the highest we have across these major platforms. Do you trust Cam Akers though in the playoffs?
Trusting Cam Akers is a tough thing to do. And I definitely don't trust him in week 16 against Denver, right? Because even today, he was 17 for 60. It's not the most efficient day, under 4 yards per carry, but he did have the 2 touchdowns. Las Vegas, Green Bay is not good against the run. We just saw them get torched twice in a row the last 2 weeks. And the Chargers are not good against the run. So every other week but that, I would feel fine starting Cam Akers. He's been getting work. And those teams are very bad against the run. So I do feel a little bit better about it. And I do think no matter who's starting quarterback for the Rams, they are going to continue to try to protect that quarterback by running the ball. And it seems like we've kind of had a back and forth with him and Kyron Williams over who gets the most rushing attempts. But it does look like Cam Akers is back from the dead and going to get those opportunities the rest of the season.
Next up, I feel like we just need to hit repeat from every other episode. I feel like we tell you every week to pick up Mack Hollins. The guy still got low ownership, but the volume is just so much. I mean, how many guys can you pick off waivers knowing you're probably getting in the 7 to double digit targets per week type situation? I know this week wasn't great for him, but with the matchups coming up outside of San Francisco, you could still play him and feel confident that he's going to get you in the 5 to 10 targets. Where are you at with Mack Hollins?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I'm definitely not starting him in week 17. But if you are desperate for a wide receiver, the volume's there. Like, he's going to get 6+ targets every week. It's him and it's Devontae Adams, and that's it. And since their defense doesn't stop anybody, that's who's going to get the bulk of the targets, are those two guys. Obviously, they're running games where they're living right now with Josh Jacobs and how well he's playing. But I mean, it's Devontae Adams and Mack Hollins right now in the passing game, and that's it. And I'll take those targets. It is desperation, but it's depth. You may not start him, but if something happens, at least you've got him. And this is, we don't want this to happen, but what happens if Devontae Adams has an injury or misses a game? This dude's going to get 14 targets. We want that. So, but that could also be bad for him. Jalen Ramsey's attention in week 14. Obviously, it looks like Adams won't miss this week unless he has a practice injury. But having the top corner on him might change some stuff. But still, volume.
Yeah, those people that worry about picking up a guy for the playoffs, I mean, for the championship run, you got to get to week 17 to be in week 17. So Mack Hollins is fine to play over the next few weeks because good volume, good opportunity to score you fantasy points.
I mean, what is this? The worst week he's probably going to have? 5 receptions for 35 yards with what he's getting. That's an 8.5 point day in PPR, right? It's not good, but at least it's not a 0 or a 2 point day, right? So
I had a guy league start Randall Cobb over him, which cracked me up because Randall Cobb got you 0, where this guy's sitting on your bench.
Randall Cobb did have 2 end zone targets. That could have made it a big day, though, but
could have, didn't. And that's Hollins. It's a safer floor than some of these other potential guys.
Yep.
All right, Nico Collins. This is another volume play. Obviously, this week saved a day with a touchdown, but they're going to keep targeting him on the heavy because he's a solid wide receiver. He's a quarterback's friend because he can get open. The issue here is that the quarterbacks there in Houston are just not good. They have a pretty solid matchup, and no matter what, they're going to have to keep throwing to try to stay in games, right? How are you with Nico Collins? Is this a guy that you're thinking of in your flex position, or is this just a guy that you want to have on your bench just in case? Where are you at?
Him and Mack Hollins are in the same boat for me, right? Because the targets are there, but the efficiency necessarily isn't. And Houston's not an offense that has a lot of touchdown upside in it to save his day like today. So those two guys are depth pieces for me for a playoff run. He does have a good playoff schedule. Obviously, Dallas, they're going to have to throw a lot against Dallas. KC, going to have to throw a lot. Tennessee can't stop people in the passing game, and Jacksonville can't stop people in the passing game. So, yeah, his schedule is not crazy, but it's not like I'm throwing him in there and hoping for the best. It is, if I'm missing somebody, it's depth, protection against that, where I have volume and have a floor. Because still, again, a 6.5 point floor is probably what you're getting right now with the amount of targets that he's getting, and we'll take that.
Next up, Jahan Dotson. This one, he's an interesting matchup because this is a good wide receiver group. I mean, obviously, we got Terry McLaurin, we got Curtis Samuel. This guy's probably their second option in the passing game. Would be my guess at this point. Got 9 targets, caught 5 of them, 54 and a touchdown. Look good this week. We got a bye week next week, so it's another one of those that you may not need to jump on because guys won't be shooting for him because of the bye potentially. But then after that, New York, you can play him against New York. San Francisco, it's going to be tricky. And then Cleveland is solid for the championship. How do you feel about Dotson the next few weeks?
Yeah, I would love to get him this week so I don't have to use a waiver priority on him, right? Like if you don't fear that other people are going to pick him up in the waiver portion, you can save your fab, or you can wait and let people use their waiver wire picks on other people, and then you get him in the free for all, right? And save that and move up, so if somebody pops next week, you've got a better waiver situation. But I think he's definitely the second best option on this Washington passing game, Curtis Samuel's fun, but he's also more of a gadget guy. And what we had been, the only thing that we were knocking Dotson for in the first half of the season was there wasn't a lot of volume, but he was getting touchdowns. Well, if he's going to start getting 9 targets, 7 targets with touchdown upside, he's going to be a fantasy starter, not just a fill in, not just a flex play, but an actual fantasy starter in that offense. So I like Jahan Dotson a lot, and if this continues, he could be huge, huge in weeks 15 and 17. Again, we're going to tell you this a lot. Right now, San Francisco's playing out of their mind on defense, and I don't want to start a lot of people against them. So week 16, he's probably not going to be a start for you. But 15 and 17 could definitely be a big play for you.
Next up, Darius Slayton. So obviously the ownership has gone up. So kudos to you guys that did pay attention to every time that we say to pick him up. He's continuing to get plenty of targets. Now, obviously, he's not catching all of them, but he's looked really good this year. He's getting targeted significantly. He's easily their wide receiver one, their top option in the passing game. You want that piece because he's getting you fantasy points and probably a guy that you can feel confident throwing in your flex most weeks at this point. Where are you at with Darius Slayton?
Yeah, he's definitely a start every week with the volume that he's getting in an offense that's not great, but decent. We're probably going to see a couple touchdowns over the final 4 weeks, right? Like he's just getting too much volume not to get some. And I think he's only had 2 on the season. And I think that'll change a little bit. Which weeks it is, I don't know. But, outside of really Darius Slay in week 14, after that, like you don't have a lot of worries defense-wise of him getting shut down. So he's also a good play because it could literally be one play that gets you there. He could have a 60-yard touchdown. We talked about it last week and make your day. We talked about it this morning on the Boomer Bust show. Or he can do what he did today and have 6 receptions for 90 yards and get you to 15. So he can get there multiple ways. He is the guy in his offense at wide receiver and has a fairly decent stretch in the playoffs.
All right, next up, there's Corey Davis from the Jets. The ownership levels being so low is just wild to me. I know quarterback concerns throughout the year and injuries and whatnot, but man, this guy's just such a good receiver. And he's got a really nice playoff matchup. He's one of those guys, if you need some depth or need a guy that you could potentially flex, he's a guy I want to target. Where are you at with Corey Davis?
Yeah, I mean, this dude targets. And we've talked about it. The Jets are going to throw the ball a lot in these playoff games. Actually, in all 4 of these games, right? Even Buffalo, it's not a great matchup, but they're going to have to throw the ball a lot. He's going to get targets. It's him and Garrett Wilson, and then everybody else shares the scraps, right? So under 20% everywhere, like I just don't get it. But get him now. Hopefully Mike White's a little more efficient, and we're looking at 8 to 10 targets with 6 to 8 receptions.
Huge.
Yeah, he could be great down the stretch if he stays healthy.
Next up, Treylon Burks, the guy who didn't stay healthy. He got hurt after 1 catch, 25 yards for 1 touchdown. But keep an eye on the injury report. So it sounds like it won't be something that's significant. Obviously, he's in a concussion protocol. Last I had read. If he can get out of there, I mean, this playoff matchups are just so juicy. I mean, these are all very good matchups where he can get you some solid fantasy points and be a flexible or startable guy throughout the playoffs. How do you feel about Treylon Burks?
Yeah, and the reason why I really wanted to make sure he was on here again, these numbers are a little bit high on some of the platforms, right? But what you might see with him in the concussion protocol is people dropping him this week because of that, not knowing if he's going to be able to play next week. You might be able to pick him up after they drop him, but still 40-50% of the leagues on Yahoo and ESPN, you can get him in, and I think he is going to be huge down the stretch. I mean, literally, game started real early, gets that 1 target, that 1 reception, that 1 touchdown, and looks like he's off to a big day, and then has the concussion. And if that deters people from him, you should take advantage of it because Jacksonville, Los Angeles, and
Matchups.
Houston, again, terrible against the run. Who knows if they'll have to throw against them much? But guess what? Treylon Burks is going to get 30% of the target market share. So even if they throw 25 times, he's looking at 7 to 8 targets with big playability. So I like it. I love Treylon Burks. Very, very, very good pickup if you can get him.
All right. Now we want to bring up some honorable mentions. And these are guys that either we've brought up before, think have some value. But one guy you're not seeing us bring up is Brock Purdy. I want to make sure we talk about this San Francisco situation, just because people are going to want to know. Jimmy Garoppolo being done for the year. Brock Purdy is not on our list at all because I don't think there's any situation where you're going to be thinking about starting him right now. There's plenty of other options available, especially with the playoffs on the line. You don't want to be trusting a guy like this in your lineups yet. You would rather trust a Mike White, a Jared Goff, Mariota, Tannehill, possibly Deshaun. I mean, obviously Deshaun looked rough this week. So I want to make sure that Rick, you give your thoughts on the San Francisco situation. And then are there any honorable mentions that you're excited about that you think could have been on our list? Where are you at with these guys?
Yeah, Brock Purdy, just with the options that are out there, I'm not going there yet. When we look at the quarterbacks, another one that I could consider, like we've got Marcus Mariota on here, but what's Atlanta going to do? Are they going to try to see what they have in Desmond Ridder before the end of the season? That's a potential. So, keep an eye on the rumblings and grumblings. You want to be ahead of the curve on that one. And if you want to try to get Ridder, obviously some rushing upside there. But yeah, Brock Purdy just doesn't fit in with these guys, right? And then when we look at running backs, like Ty Johnson is on here. We don't know how long Michael Carter is going to be out. He could get pushed out, but he is getting a lot of work right now with Zonovan Knight as the starter. Kyron Williams, we talked about, has been going back and forth. Tyler Algier getting a lot of work rushing, but not a whole lot else in that Atlanta offense. Jerick McKinnon, a big week this week, or not a big week, but for him, big week. And then Jordan Mason as the backup to CMC there in San Francisco, 8 carries for 51 yards. If something happened to CMC, Jordan Mason would probably get a lot of work. Receivers, it's a lot of the same stuff. A lot of guys that are up and down week to week. Chase Claypool on bye next week, but has led the team in targets last 2. Darnell Mooney out for the year. Him and Fields, getting a better connection. Sharks have been getting more involved, but Jameson Williams is coming in. So which one of those guys is going to be the number 2 down the stretch? Michael Gallup, we haven't seen him play this week. Actually, they're playing right now, right?
He got a touchdown.
Touchdown this week. A guy that we both love. It just hasn't panned out so far. We talked about Curtis Samuel a little bit. Gets used in a lot of ways. Odell Beckham could sign this week. And Isaiah McKenzie up and down, but, Buffalo Bills offense. And then at tight end, it's ugly. We keep telling you that week to week, but I don't even know how to say Chigozium. Is that how you say it?
Sounds right.
Okonwo.
Yep, Conwo.
Getting some targets there in Tennessee. Noah Fant, another good day for Seattle, but he's been up and down. Hunter Henry, one week he gets a bunch of targets, next week you don't. So, these guys are guys you can look at, but there's not a lot of confidence that you put into these guys.
Definitely buyer beware. Thank you guys as always for hanging out with us. If you have questions, drop below. Otherwise, we'll see you next week.